Hello, I'm Lisa Hayward. I'm with the University of Washington Edge Center. And today I'm going to do a training on using accessible language. It's part of a three-part series that we're doing on science communication through our center. So give me a minute. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So the goal for today is to achieve simplicity in our communication. And if we can do that, we can better reach practitioners, policymakers, educators, community members, a whole range of people outside of our technical discipline. So I'm going to talk about using simplicity today. But before I give you any tools, I'm going to tell a little story. This is a story about a guy from the early part of the last century. He was 29. He was a newly elected representative in Britain, and he was going to give a speech to his new colleagues. So he got up, he got midway through the speech, and then he just went blank for 3 whole minutes, which is hard to imagine. His political opponents were snickering, talking amongst themselves. His supporters were staring at the ground and trying to distance themselves from the debacle. Finally, after 3 minutes, he went back to his seat and he just put his head in his hands and he felt like his career was over. Sure enough, the next day, all the newspapers were talking about the shipwreck, and a famous doctor was speculating that he had early onset dementia. And everybody felt like his career was definitely over. Luckily, it was not, because that man was Winston Churchill. And 36 years later, he had his moment when he was a newly elected prime minister, and he was faced with convincing the British populace to confront Germany with military force rather than try to negotiate a deal. At the time, popular sentiment was definitely in favor of negotiating. But over the course of 2 weeks and 6 speeches, he turned things around. And a lot of people credit him with turning around the course of the war as well, and even saving civilization as we know it. So what happened in those 36 years? How did he go from being the shipwreck to being one of the best orators of the 20th century? It was not natural talent. He got very dogged about pursuit of excellence as an orator, and he employed a lot of different techniques. But one of the most important ones was to replace long words with short ones. So he did this almost obsessively, and we know this because after the first debacle, the 3-minute pause in his speech, that was a speech he'd given with no notes. After that, he took notes with him for every single speech he gave, and we can see his edits on those notes. And it shows that he's systematically crossing out long words and replacing them with short words. So the way he put it, and I love this, is that short words are best. Very well said. The way he put it, just to paraphrase, is that the short words are the more ancient words, and they have the more powerful resonance within us. I like to think that they just require the least amount of internal translation, so we're better able to focus our cognitive resources on the message being presented. And if you want to see an example of that, here's a sentence by Winston Churchill. Apparently, he was riding in a car through London with a military secretary. And at the time, German bombs were falling on London on a daily basis. All of the British aircraft were in the skies. Fighting was the most intense that it ever had been. And Winston Churchill said to his military secretary, "I have never been more moved in my life. Just give me 5 minutes." And so at the end of those 5 minutes, he asked the military secretary to write something down for him. And he wrote, "Never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." Very famous sentence, very powerful. And if you look at it in terms of syllable, you can see that only 4 of these words have more than one syllable. And these 4 words only have 2 syllables. So you can see how much power and impact is loaded into a sentence with very, very small words. Winston Churchill was a master of this. So let's step back and contrast that with our training in science communication that comes as part of our technical training. So first, I have a million problems with the schematic, so don't get me started, but I'm going to just use it as kind of a reference point. You can imagine a circle or a sphere that contains all of human knowledge. And you can imagine a little core at the center representing what we learn in elementary school. And then the layer that's built on that through our education in high school. And then the little bump that starts to appear as we layer on more knowledge in college. And then the extension that comes with a master's, and the further extension that comes with a PhD. So once you're at that boundary, the boundary of what's known by all of humanity, then you start to push that little pimple out at the surface. And that's what you do with your PhD. You've contributed something to what it is that we know about the world. So in the course of this, you've narrowed your focus. The world looks different to you because it's just that little bit of interface there between the red and the black. But it's important not to forget the bigger picture. So if you want to go explain to someone what it is you do or why it's important and why they should care or why they should fund it, then you've got to step back and you find that commonality. So remember what we all learned in elementary school. Remember what we all learned in high school. Can you bring it back to that level to communicate about it with people outside your field? And what does that mean? Well, we know how to communicate once we get a PhD. We're good at that. The thing is that it's a specific kind of communication. So there's a lot of pressure in science to be accurate and be efficient, but mostly to be accurate. So how are we accurate? Well, we have to use jargon, statistics, graphs, caveats, all things that help another person replicate what we've done, help explain what we've found, that are efficient in conveying the meaning of the work that you've done, as long as you're talking with the peers in your subdiscipline. This is all totally appropriate. This is how science is done. We need these skills. This takes a long time to acquire a lot of these skills. I was a third-year graduate student before I felt like I could effectively communicate at a conference with my peers. And we get trained to do this. We do get training. It's implicit in most cases, but it's all around us. It's how our mentors communicate. It's how we write for journals. It's how we write for grant applications. It's how our peers communicate. It's what we do at conferences. All of this, we're learning all of this the whole time we're going through graduate school. So we do get this training. What we don't get, unless we really seek it out, is training in how to communicate with people outside of our technical discipline. And that's part of the reason that the Edge Center is sponsoring this science communication training series. Part of our goal is to help you communicate with people outside your discipline. It also helps even in academia because you can be a lot more interdisciplinary if you get away from your jargon. So this shows that having specialized terminology or jargon reduces the number of citations of scientific papers. So your impact is going down effectively. If you want that impact up, and who doesn't, it's a good idea to get away from your jargon. So let's look at what some of the best communicators of our day are doing, as well as some of the better speech, better orators of the past. Here is Neil deGrasse Tyson over here. He's getting just over a 5th grade reading level. Reading level is a score of readability. So if you look at Hemingway, he's at a 5th grade level. Neil deGrasse Tyson's just a little bit less readable than that. Steve Jobs has the same score for his Stanford address. He was known as a master of simplicity. JFK's moonshot speech was, is widely considered to be one of the most influential speeches of the last century. Sapolsky's TED Talk. So who's Robert Sapolsky? He's a very famous science communicator. Some people say he's the best one that we have today. He's a neuroscientist. And when he writes, you can see over here, when he writes For a journal, his readability is a 16. Very, very technical language, long sentences, long words, the whole thing. But when he writes for a TED Talk, for example, for people outside of his field, then he can bring it down to a 7th grade level. Churchill, his finest hour speech was just below the 8th grade level. This is the speech he gave after France fell, when morale really needed to get boosted. Katharine Hayhoe, she's one of my favorite science communicators. I talk about her all the time in my course. Her TED Talk was at an 8th grade level, just above. Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, was a 9th grade level. And so you can see all of these orators, all of these talented science communicators, they're all able to get their readability down into kind of a middle school level. And this is an important skill, and this is something we want to work toward today. So how do we do this? One tool I find really useful, and one tool that I teach to all my science communication students, is this Flesch-Kincaid readability tool. So when you use this, you get 2 scores: reading ease, where high score is better, and grade level, where lower is better. This is sometimes a calculator that's built right into Word, so you can do a spell check, and then you get the Flesch-Kincaid score right at the bottom of the box. And basically, how it's calculated is total words over total sentences, total words per sentence, total syllables per word. So shorter sentences, shorter words will increase your readability. I struggle with the calculator built into Word. It's really easy for some people, but it varies from PC to Mac and also within versions. So I tend to use this website because it's just bookmarked in my browser, and you can go there and you can paste your text and it gives you the same scores. I teach this one to my students just so we're all on the same page, not lost in the different versions of Word. So people wonder often, isn't it dumbing it down if we try to talk about what we do to a middle school level? Because you need more understanding than that to truly understand what it is we do, right? But I think Susan Joy Hassel puts it well when she says that using common language is smartening up, because the dumbest thing is to talk to people in language they don't understand. And I know we've all seen the speaker that wastes everybody's time by doing this. It's unfortunately very common with academics. So let's try to get away from that, even if bringing the readability grade level down, even if that creates tension. So I'm going to have you get out your own abstract and do this exercise on your own. But before I do that, I'm just going to show you a little bit about what it looks like. So these are some sentences from an abstract that I wrote a long time ago. And I'm really embarrassed to admit they totally obscure the point of the paper. It's just a really bad way to start out. But that was how I wrote at the time. I got a grade level of 14.7, which there's no shame in that. Remember, Sapolsky has a 16 for his peer-reviewed papers. If you're writing to within your discipline, it's fine to use those technical words. That's, fully appropriate, as I've discussed. But if we're bringing this to another audience, we've got to do something about that grade level. So at this point, the first step is to imagine to yourself, what audience is it that I'm trying to reach? And imagine an audience that's outside your field. In this case, I'm going to imagine Forest Service managers, because they're people that the study was designed to reach ultimately. So for that audience, I want to get down to a grade level of 8 or below. So how do I start bringing this readability up, the grade level down? I can look for these clunky words like has a proclivity for, has high proximity to, has the ability to compensate for perturbations. And then I can find ways to simplify that language. These are pretty simple in one way. Has a proclivity for can become likes, is near for proximity, can't get used to noise being the perturbation in this case. In a lot of cases, that's fine. In some cases, that introduces a lot of tension. So has a proclivity for, this is something I would say about the quail that I studied in graduate school. I'd say they had a proclivity for a novel object. I can't replace that with likes because that would imply some understanding of their subjective experience that I just can't reach for. So when I try to substitute the word likes for that phrase, I get very uncomfortable and I have to ask myself, what is my goal? I'm reaching Forest Service managers. Is this the appropriate language to use? And I can't tell you whether it is or it isn't, because that's something, it's a judgment call you're going to have to make. Just know that there's going to be tension and know that in some cases, you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit of your accuracy in order to become effective as a communicator. And that hurts. That hurts when all of our training has been about increasing accuracy, having as high an accuracy as possible. So here I go with the first attempt. I've shortened the whole thing significantly. I showed you the first 2 sentences before. Now I'm showing you the entire abstract. And I'm also kind of hoping that no one reads this because I'm still not proud of it. My grade level has actually gone up here. I don't know why this happens, but I see it with my students as well. So if this happens to you, don't get discouraged. Just keep trying, keep iterating. You'll get it down. So what's another thing you can do? Well, the big words were a problem. You can replace those with small words. Remember that big sentences are also a problem. So here I've found one that's 32 words long. And is it possible to break this into 2 sentences? Yes, it is. So let's do that. And we can also find ways to reduce the words where possible. So what we found was that short-term motorcycle exposure. All I need to say is we found that. And I have been writing for a long time. I've been doing science communication, but I still always find these phrases that can be reduced like that. So now that I've broken it down and reduced some words where possible, I have 2 sentences, one with 12 and one with 13 words. So that was a win. And 6 attempts later, I've gotten my abstract down to an 8th grade level, which remember was my goal for these Forest Service managers. So here I feel comfortable. I could work to get it down further, but sometimes that means doing awkward workarounds that increase confusion rather than readability. Okay, so here I'm gonna just pause, just ask you to go get that abstract. It could be for a conference presentation. It could be for a grant proposal. It could be for a manuscript, just something that you've written, you wanna work on, or if that fails, something that someone else wrote and for an academic audience that you wanna work on. And then we'll start by getting the readability either through Word or through the website, and then writing what it is to start with, taking a pass, writing that. I like to paste each pass. So I have a record and each time give it a score at the bottom until you get to that middle school level that you're aiming for. So this can take some time. This can definitely take some time. And once you're done with that, once you've gotten to the grade school level, just come back, restart the video, and we'll talk about some limitations. Okay, so now you've reduced your grade level to middle school level or lower. Well, not lower, that would be weird. Okay, but we want to think about the limitations of the tool. So in some cases, you run into long words that are difficult to replace, like community. I use that word a lot. Individual, hypothesis, unexpected. These words have a lot of syllables. But when you try to replace them with words that have fewer syllables, you often end up in kind of an awkward place. So you might just decide to leave them and accept that you're going to have an 8th grade reading level instead of a 6th grade reading level, or whatever it means for you. And then short words, just be aware that the tool won't catch jargon if you have acronyms in there. Acronyms are bad for readability, but they don't get caught by the Flesch-Kincaid score. And then different meanings. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but some small words have different meanings for a general audience than they do for someone in your discipline. Sign, it could be an indication, an astrological sign. but you might want to say a plus or minus sign for your general audience. Bias is a distortion or a political motive, whereas the scientist might say an offset from an observation. These are just things to think about. This comes from Susan Joy Hassel. Again. And then the last little bit, this is funny. I found this paper recently looking at the effect of writing style on success in grant applications. And I had always suspected that using simple language would increase the success rate of a grant proposal, but this actually indicates the opposite. They found that more technical language and longer sentence structure, more convoluted sentence structure, increase the success rate in grant applications. And so that's something to think about. Technical language has its place. We had a long discussion in my in-person training about why this might be. I'll leave you to speculate. And that's it. So if you want to reach me, I'm happy to answer questions or provide further resources. I'm at lhayward@uw.edu. Okay, thank you.